Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me on a wonderful March 22nd as we explore this concept of teams. I know it's going to be a short period of time that we have here this morning. So just to give you a little bit of a heads up, we will be recording this webinar. A copy of the slides will also be sent out to you as well. Because part of this presentation, when we talk about teams, that's a very big concept. So we're going to touch base on some broad principles. We're going to dive down into some specific ones, but I'm also hoping to provide you a tangent or an avenue or a pathway perhaps to do a little bit more digging on your own, given where you might be with teams at this present time for yourself. Just a little bit about us as we jump in. At Psychometrics, we consider ourselves as specialists in providing insights. And really those are insights about ourselves, insights about the people that we work with, and then also that combination of people and how they come together, those things that we actually call teams. And so I'm hoping today that will tick a number of boxes for you, that there will be some self-insight, there might be some team insight for you as well, and maybe some of those aha moments as you consider your work moving forward with the people who are actually around you. Our agenda today, it's going to be pretty brief and it's going to be pretty fast, but these are the four broad topics that we're going to be talking about. First, what are those characteristics of teams that are effective? What sets them apart? Then we're going to shift into what makes teams break down. What are the challenges? What are the difficulties that they have that get in the way of that effective teamwork? And then we'll subtly shift into how might we make teams work a little bit more effectively. And then last but not least, of course, in this kind of new world where people are working with a variety of different models, we're going to touch base a little bit on the leading and the working in kind of virtual and hybrid teams. And then we'll wrap up with an opportunity for some questions. Now, we talk a lot about teams, but I think it's really worthwhile for us to quickly spend some time on what does a team actually mean? How would we define that as? And so here's a great definition that I find works well because it captures a number of the key concepts of what a team actually is. So individuals interacting dynamically. So there is an interaction. They're independent. So team members rely on each other. And they also work adaptively toward a goal. So that means they do share a goal and they make adaptations along the way. Sometimes those are adaptations of what the team is actually doing, but more frequently they are adaptations of how do team members act, behave, and think, and adjust those attitudes, behaviors, and cognitions in response to the situation that they find themselves in. So if that's what a team is, the next question is, well, why do we have teams in the first place? And I think the obvious answer is there are some things that we just can't do by ourselves. Some of the projects we work on are quite complex. They require a variety of different knowledge sets and a variety of different skills, but they do need to come together. And research has been very consistent that groups produce better outcomes than the sum of individuals. And some really interesting ones is you can take groups of 3, 4, 5 people, even if they may not have the same level of expertise, they will be better at solving complex problems than one specific expert who on their own might actually have a greater knowledge set, skills, or greater abilities than each individual in the group. But as that group comes together, their problem-solving power is much higher. And so teams make a lot of sense. And in many ways, what you could say, 1 + 1 = 3. The sum is greater than the individual contributions. And what we're seeing, of course, in this, let's call it the world of work, is that teams and their importance is increasing. Deloitte puts out a human capitals trends report every year. And almost every year, one of the top things is how are teams, are they working? And it becomes much more of a critical factor for organizations in terms of what they see as leading to their success. We're also seeing this growth of what I'd call multi-team systems. So they are teams of teams that come together. And this merging of teams on projects and then separating to go to other projects and merging back with different groups, there is more of this ongoing cycle of how these groups are coming together. And of course, that then starts to put a lot of pressure on how can we make teams work well, given that they're so critical to how organizations can perform? Now, what I'd like to start off with is a first little question for you. And here's my curious owl. And what I'm interested in is, as you come here today, um, what is it that's bringing you here the most? Is it, you know what, I'm primarily interested here as a team member. Actually, you know what, I lead teams, or are you someone who facilitates teams? And maybe let's just pick why you are here today for that, because what we do know is many of us can find ourselves in each of these roles, and we might find ourselves shifting back and forth in these roles over the course of a day, which is quite something, isn't it? Okay, so we're pretty close to having, I'm going to close this here in just a minute or two, not a minute or two, sorry, a second or two. And then what I'll do is I'll just share the results quickly for everyone. And we can see that about half of us are here as team facilitators. A little under a third are people who lead teams. And about a fifth of us are saying, hey, you know what, primarily I'm interested in this because I'm someone who actually works on teams. What I'd like to kind of highlight for each of us is that we often wear multiple hats. And so sometimes saying what is our role can be difficult to say as we shift between being team leaders, team members, team facilitators. And as we go through this presentation today, what I would encourage you is just to remember you do wear multiple hats. And some of the insights might be for you as a team member. They might also fit for you as a team leader, and they might also work for you then as a team facilitator. Um, so it's going to be a little metaphysical, I would say, in terms of the variety of different things to kind of think about as we look at this information here today. So let's jump then into what are the characteristics of effective teams. If you have ever tried to enter this in Google, you'll find there's a lot of different models. I started working at 3 because I thought anything less than 3 wouldn't make any sense. And I can find models that went all the way up to 15. And then I just got tired of searching for them. So you can kind of pick as many characteristics as you might like. And in some of these areas, you only need to wait a year. So in 2020, Forbes had an article about their 14 characteristics of high-performing teams. 1 year later, they had the 5 characteristics of high-performing teams. So there are a lot of different articles, options, ways of considering things. However, if we boil them down, what research is starting to find is that there are 4 primary characteristics of effective teams. The first one, of course, is effective teams have clear goals. They have a shared sense of direction, and they're able to get everyone on the same page. Now, when you're reading academic works, they call this the shared mental model. But in those local terms, it really means everyone knows what they're working towards. The second kind of key characteristic of effective teams is that they have appropriate talent. They have the team members who have the required skills and the capabilities to actually accomplish those goals. And what that often means then are effective teams are not teams where everybody is the same. In fact, we've really seen homogeneous teams struggle. However, a variety of people who do have skills that can contribute to what the team needs to accomplish are really important for that team to be effective. The third one, of course, then is good interpersonal relationships. That talent needs to be able to come together and work. And I would kind of say that good interpersonal relationships are highlighted by 3 things. 1, are people cooperating? 2, are they able to coordinate their work? And 3, can they communicate well? Can they share information that allows people to understand what other people are saying and maintains that clear sense of direction? And then, of course, the 4th characteristic is they can solve problems. And by problems, I don't just mean here's the challenge of the day that has popped up, but instead they can create new projects. They can write new strategies. They can solve conflict. Problems mean there is a challenge, there is something that we need to face. Do we have a way of working through that? And teams that have these four broad characteristics then perform at a much higher level than those that do not, or those that only have some of them. And I think that is a critical point, that effective teams have all of these. They don't have 3 out of 4. They don't have 2 out of 4. They have all 4 of these in place. And so one of the initial takeaways for each of you on teams or facilitating teams is, how is the team doing in these 4 areas? Where might their gap actually be? Where the gap is, that's going to be the key area to address. So now I'm curious, I'd like to have a little second question for the group here. And that really is, in your experience and the teams that you're working with kind of right now, what are you seeing as the biggest challenges, the areas where teams are kind of struggling the most? As someone who's always interested in data, we're using GoToWebinar here, of course, so I see this live update of the polls, and I'm always quite fascinated to see these numbers kind of come to fruition. And so as they have been generating, what's really interesting to me is 2 of them quickly jumped out. And we'll collect a few more responses here, and then I'll share them, and we'll see if that maintains itself over time. So here we go. The biggest area where people are struggling is building and maintaining good relationships. I'll agree, that's certainly been my experience. Hybrid virtual work has actually made that a little bit difficult too. The second area, amazingly, is setting clear goals, which really, when you think of teams coming together, is often step one of what are we actually trying to accomplish. So you can imagine if you can't get that right, the other things will quickly start to come apart, won't they? And then, of course, that's followed by a fifth of you voting that they don't have a good way of solving problems. So if good teams have ways of setting clear goals, working with each other well, gathering the talent that they actually need, and solving problems, that requires people to have certain skills. And I think an important thing to recognize is that for team members, there's a need for both task and team competencies. So task competencies are those knowledge, skills, and abilities that the individual needs to get their specific tasks done. But the team competencies then are those KSAs, those knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed to interact with others effectively to achieve those team outcomes. And in the world of organizational psychology, there are these 3 what we would call transportable team competencies, where it doesn't seem to matter what kind of team you're working on, these competencies always pop up as important. And so the first one is coordination. And that really is the ability of team members to kind of organize themselves with others and to work towards that shared goal. So can they have a way of connecting with each other and bringing their different skills to tackle the problem that's in front of them? The second one, of course, communication. Surprise, surprise. I'm sure none of you are shocked by this. One of the key things for working in teams is, do you have a way of sharing information? And that means sending and receiving information from teammates. One of the key things, tell people to avoid jargon. It's always a killer for communication. And the other thing is, quality is more important than frequency. It's not to say that frequency isn't important, but quality is more important. I am continually shocked at how quickly people will communicate without taking a little bit of a review to making sure that it actually is saying what they want it to say, or taking the time to check that they have the understanding of what their team members are communicating to them. The third transportable competency for team members is adaptability. Um, can you adjust your behaviors and strategies responding to changes in the team's circumstances? Um, so this idea of can we adjust how we respond to things is critical for teamwork to be effective. On this one slide here, I'm breaking kind of a core rule of presentations. It's a lot of text on screen. The reason that I'm putting this here is just so you'll have a takeaway for later on when you get the slide deck. This is a step below or behind those, or underneath, let's say, those transportable team competencies.
Shawn,
These
I
are,
am so sorry to interrupt you. We just are not able to see those slides. If you don't mind
oh,
popping
sorry
those
about
up
that.
there.
Okay, let me just see.
No worries. I believe it is just stuck on that pole.
Oh, is it? Okay.
There we go. I'm able to
Is it
see it.
back?
And yeah, the comments are coming in. We're able to see it.
Okay,
Thanks,
thanks,
everyone.
Camille. Sorry about that, everyone. Here, let me just zip right back. You have not missed much. These are the three transportable team competencies that we talked about. Here is a step lower. Each of these competencies identified by research as impacting effective performance in teams. Um, the references below there as well. I think this is a perfect one of those. I want to dig a little bit deeper into some of the specifics of teamwork that you can pursue after the webinar here today. But what you'll notice, there are three categories. Attitude competencies, so what are people thinking? How do they feel about teamwork? Behavior competencies relate to what do people actually do? And then cognition competencies, which actually relate to how do people think and what do people know? And of course, they use cognition because in IO psychology, this is referred to as the ABCs of teamwork. So why do teams break down? Well, there's breakdowns because of the individuals that are involved in the teams. There's breakdowns because of the people who are actually leading teams. And then there are also breakdowns because of the lack of organizational support that's required to pull off teamwork. So if we jump into team members specifically, one of the key things to remember is that a team of experts does not necessarily make an expert team, but the team members need to be able to work together. And all team members have what we can describe as surface level and deep level competencies. Our surface level ones are kind of what role do you have, what's your reputation? The deep level attributes are your personality characteristics, what abilities do you have, what's important to you, what do you value, what attitudes do you carry? And deep level attributes, of course, have a much greater influence on team performance than surface ones. However, a lot of times teams are thrown together based on surface level. So let's get together these people because that is their role, or this is the reputation, this is what I know of them. We would be much better at forming teams with a consideration of the deep level attributes of people and what they would actually bring and how that aligns to what the team needs to solve. Now, what we're seeing, of course, is that for people working in teamworks, there's a deficiency in what we would call soft skills or interpersonal competencies. So those capabilities related to coordinating, communicating, cooperating with others, that is where we're seeing at the team member level, there is the breakdown. So we know good teams, they're made up of individuals who value teamwork and have those capabilities for coordinating, communicating, and cooperating well with others. For team leaders, where the breakdown is, initially, of course, is that a lot of team leaders approach it in a transactional, task-focused type of way. So it really becomes more of, we meet, I assign people things that they need to do, they complete them. However, we know that does not work well for teams, especially if they're going to be what we would call on that level, high level of effectiveness. The second area where team leaders tend to lead to a breakdown in teams is, I've got avoiding conflict on there, but really it's a failure to resolve conflict in an appropriate way. So what we've consistently see is that team leaders are failing to, in many ways, address conflict in an open and honest way. They avoid it, they dance around it, they don't deal with it directly. And what that leads to then is a weakening of what we would call psychological safety. The comfort that people can have of trying things out, making mistakes, and then feeling safe to discuss them or open them up for communication. And that, of course, becomes a critical learning loop for people. If we can't talk about our mistakes, if we're not comfortable about pushing the envelope a bit, we will naturally be hampered as a team. And then, of course, the third area for team leaders where we're seeing a gap is they're not providing enough constructive feedback. And constructive feedback on how are we going to be working as a team and what are the expectations here. That's where the lack is. And without that, then, of course, team leaders aren't having the appropriate necessary influence and role modeling required for teams to work well. And then our third potential area of breakdown, of course, is organizations themselves. A great little rule of thumb: bad conditions trump potential when it comes to teamwork. It's very easy for orgs to talk about teamwork, but then in the application of work itself, not be as active in supporting them. So it's important for organizations to communicate that teamwork is important, but the top leadership also needs to model that and show that teamwork really matters. And that really is through the reinforcing of teamwork behaviors. And also then providing the resources and the processes that actually make teamwork easy to do rather than difficult. I've had some experiences with team leaders where they say, oh yeah, teamwork, it's the most important thing ever. And yet you talk to members of their team and their team members will say, yeah, every time it feels like we're chatting about something in the group, we might be getting a side glance like, are we wasting time because we're hanging around chatting about something? It's a very inadvertent thing potentially by some of these team leaders, but the impact is quite substantial. So make sure that you not only talk about it, but you actually show and engage in behaviors that support it and drive it. So tips for making some teamwork. The broad goal here is we need to shift that consideration from me to us. That teams are a group that have a shared goal in common. And it also is a shift from a hierarchy to a team. That it's not people are just assigned specific tasks in a role and we're all stacked on a list in a hierarchy, but instead it is a group that is sharing work towards something. Without that, what we find you don't see are those backup behaviors. And by backup behaviors, I mean team members helping out other team members when they need it. Here's a great quote that I just love. Like creativity, collaboration is a habit. It may be a practice, a way of working in harmony with others, but it begins with a point of view. And I think that's really critical, that we need to start with teamwork is important, collaboration is required. And with that attitude shift, we then can start to acquire the behaviors that we need to pull that off. So how does that actually work? Well, for team members, what we need to get started is what I would call this feedback and self-awareness loop. So feedback is information that comes to us that says, hey, here's how things are going for both, yeah, that's working well, or you know, you might want to make an adjustment. That feedback really becomes important for us to determine where do we need to leverage our strengths, or where can we leverage our strengths? And then also, where might be some areas where we might need to, let's call it self-correct, adjust some behaviors based on the emerging needs. And so part of that feedback is going to come from team leadership. Part of that feedback can come from team members themselves. You can ask for it. And as team members, when you ask for it, just listen. Don't argue with the feedback, even if it can feel uncomfortable, but you need to be able to take that in. The second area then for team members, we've seen it in the poll, the biggest area of struggle for people are interpersonal skills, soft skills, things related to communicating, collaborating, coordinating. Focusing your development on those areas is going to be critical for team members themselves to be as effective as they actually can be in teams. Um, so getting feedback and self-awareness, that's the start, and that needs to, in many ways, continually cycle for team members. So seek out feedback, complete assessments, learn about yourself, and then how does that relate to teams? If you like to summarize or a little model to focus on the ABCs, the attitudes, the behaviors, and the cognitions. And you can refer back to that slide earlier in the presentation where those are outlined in a little bit more depth. Now let's shift on to our team leaders, of course. Team leaders themselves, they also need feedback and self-awareness. And in many ways, it's actually more critical for leaders because they can influence more people that are around them. So having that feedback and self-awareness loop for leaders is critical. The second area, of course, is focused on leadership training. And I can't stress this enough, leadership training actually works well. So if there's a place for you to start to say in an organization, our teams need improvement, start with team leaders. Over and over, research is showing us that if we can target the leaders of teams, it not only improves how that team performs, it improves how team members actually feel about an organization. It improves how much team members will stick with an organization. So it'll influence, turnover outcomes, job satisfaction. And there's one article, I'm going to post the link for it when we send out the slides later on. And recently they found that leadership training improves learning outcomes and organizational outcomes by up to 30%. Now that's huge for tackling leadership groups. So all of you team facilitators out there, you're doing honorable work, and it doesn't just feel good, it is incredibly valuable to team leaders. The areas of leadership training, of course, that have the most impact are, teaching them how to provide constructive feedback, teaching them how to better deal with conflict, and then also this concept of transformational leadership, where they move away from being people who assign tasks, instead to being more of leading an orchestra, bringing people together, providing motivation, and in many ways involving people in the identifying of problems and the creation of solutions or development of solutions. Now, teams themselves, of course, should also be able to self-regulate. It's very important for teams to be able to work on themselves as a team. And so we want to teach them ways that they can actually evaluate how it's going and adjust accordingly. Interventions that focus on the team as a whole are much more effective at promoting kind of beneficial behaviors, attitudes, and ways of thinking. So the first thing that teams need to do is just have a consideration, well, where are our gaps? And you can use the model here. Do we have clear goals? Do we have the appropriate talent? How are the racial relationships between members? Are we able to effectively solve the problems that we need to solve? And then based on that, engage in targeted training for those specific gaps. The third tip that I have for teams is to run things called team debriefs. And I'm going to dive into that deeper here in just a moment. Just a little backtrack quickly, highlighting one more article related to what makes for an effective team development initiative. And team development initiatives include things like formal training, they include team building, they include mentoring, coaching. What they need, though, is one, is it focused on needs that are relevant to the team? Does it respond to some current needs or needs that they're going to experience in the future? Effective team development also actively engages team members, and it's not just in the delivery of that intervention or initiative, it is in the engagement of what would actually be most appropriate for this team. What does this team require? So you are soliciting information from them of what their needs and gaps are. Then, of course, have a direct impact on what needs are going to occur within the lifespan of that team, and then implement it in a systematic, and strategic way. For those of you who are team facilitators, I am sure some of you have heard when people reach out to you, we would like to do some team building. It might start with, we want to have some fun, and then maybe do a little team building along the way. Um, we're always excited when teams are looking to do that. However, they have it the wrong way around. They first need to say, we want to improve some team performance, and it sure would be great if we could have a little bit of fun along the way. When fun comes first, when socializing comes first, it's not going to be as strategic and as impactful. Now back to team debriefs, sorry. These are one of the most effective methods for accelerating learning from experience within groups. It really is an opportunity for teams to talk about themselves and how they performed for a specific event or a specific task. The improvements you can see here on average, increases of 20 to 25%, even though they're actually relatively short in nature. What I've put on the slide here is a very basic team debrief format. You could also look up what they're called postmortems. They're called after action reports. They all do the same thing where it's, we have completed our work, now let's get together and discuss what went well, what could have gone better, and what should we do differently in the future. And mark all of this down and make it available in the future so that people can actually return to it and revise. What did we talk about? What did we do well? Let's keep doing that. What did we miss? How do we make sure we don't miss that in the future? And then what is this new pathway that we have going forward for ourselves? Wonderful things, done them with a number of teams, incredibly insightful. Here's another example of a way that I help teams think about the team themselves. So this is a bit of a distribution of assessment results in the Work Personality Index for a risk analysis of group at a bank. There's two scales here from the WPI. You can see analytical thinking and democratic. Analytical thinking really relates to how much does someone like to dig into information and work through things. Democratic is how much do you like to consult with other people, involve them in figuring things out. Now, no surprise here, you look at the group, the vast majority of people are on the side where they score higher in analytical thinking. No shock there, of course, with a risk management group that comes from a bank. People very comfortable and really enjoy and motivate digging through a lot of information as they make decisions. The democratic side, of course, though, you see a split. Half of them are on the upper side. They really want to consult with a lot of other people, involve a lot of other people in identifying and solving problems. And the other half is, you know what, I think I'm quite comfortable doing this on my own. What was interesting for this group was not me telling them, but just putting this presentation in front of them and say, can you tell me how this works for you? And the light bulb just starts going off of people saying, oh, 67% of us score in either the blue or the yellow category. We like to analyze things, and sometimes it means we analyze things to death. And what that team identified as one of their common challenges was they could never move quickly. It didn't matter how important the issue was, everything was analyzed to the nth degree. And they recognized that that was actually getting in the way of them adapting more quickly in areas where they could actually move a little bit faster, where the depth of analysis was not required. And instead, they were falling into what was comfortable, what was a habit for them, what did they prefer, rather than what did the situation actually call for. So a wonderful little trick. Take two scales that you think might relate to the concept that a team would be struggling with, map them out on an XY axis, pop it in front of them, and then as a team facilitator or even as a team leader, all you need to be is curious. How does this work? And they will bring their life and their experience, and it'll come out. I've found it an amazingly wonderful way to engage teams into thinking about teams themselves. So now I want to shift gears to kind of our last section of our presentation here today, and that's leading virtual and hybrid teams. Um, as this world of work has changed, the first thing I think that's really critical if you're leading or working with these teams is the establishment of norms. And by establishing norms, what I mean is, as a team, how are we going to work with each other? So um, when and how are we going to communicate? What are the expectations we have for when we're going to collaborate together? How do we go through the process of coordinating each other's work as we come together to accomplish our goals? And these things need to be spoken about frequently and clearly. They also need to be rewarded when the behaviors are seen, and constructive feedback needs to be given when they are not. Because everyone was initially thrown into some of this, it wasn't as planful as maybe it needs to be. Now, I think for leaders of hybrid or virtual teams, you need to be very planful about establishing those norms and how it's going to work. The second thing to remember is people are people. Um, when they were facing you in the office or looking at you over the screen, they need the same needs. Just how they are going to be met is going to shift a little bit in this virtual world. So it's important to remember connections are important. So if you can mix a little bit of social connection along with those task discussions, that's going to be very important. As leaders, you might need to be more active in your communication and reach out with people. Obviously, you're not walking past people in the office, perhaps. So you need to have a way of reaching out and connecting with them. And connecting with people not in a way that's just, I'm going to check up on your task list. Because what we know is good leaders are inspiring, they're motivating, they're providing a good role model. It can't just be, what are you doing today and how is that going? The other thing to recognize is conflict is still going to happen because people are people. So as a leader, that need or the ability to resolve conflict effectively still remains a critical thing. And then last but not least, every day we're seeing in the newspaper now, do we come back to work? Should we not? What do people want to do? Deloitte came out with some great research in their 2023 Human Capital Trends report. And really the key focus then is what works well is when the work itself dictates how is that mixed. So rather than going from an attitude, we think everyone should be together or we think people should work virtually, it comes down to, given the task at hand and what needs to be done, what makes the most sense? Now, I know not everyone's going to be in the luxury or have the luxury to do that. For some of you, it's going to be full virtual, that's how it is. For others, it's full in person, that's how it is. However, if you do have that opportunity where it is a little bit more in the hybrid world, ask yourself, given the work that we do, what makes the most sense? Do we need to be together for this? Can we do this as a collaborative virtual group? Or are some of these things best completed independently? So to summarize, effective teams, well, effective teams are ones that collaborate, coordinate, and adapt. So if you're facilitating teams, ask, how well are they doing that? That's the direction to go in for identifying the team's challenges. Effective teams also have team members who have those interpersonal skills to better communicate and connect with their team members. And then finally, effective teams have team leaders who are able to provide constructive feedback to members of their team. And they're also able to resolve the conflict that occurs when there are differences of opinion. For these groups, for the team members, the team leaders, and teams themselves, it's really important to consider, how will we drive that feedback and self-awareness group? How will I recognize, for me as a team member, what is my impact on others? Me as a team leader, what is my impact on the team? And for teams themselves to say, how are we doing and what changes might we need to make? Those are the things that are going to be critical for teams to be effective. So what I'd like to do now, I know we have a few more minutes, just open it up if there's any questions. People, please feel free to fire away some in the chat, and we can take a couple minutes to answer them if we can. If you'd like to, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. You see my handle there, it's Shawn Bakker. Works out pretty well. Was able to get one just straight up with my name. this kind of information we release on an ongoing basis. So if this is something you're curious in, people in the space of work, I'd love to connect with you. My email address is also there as well. Please feel free to send me a note. If it's something you want to dig a little bit deeper into, or you feel that I could point you in the direction of something that would be really helpful for something that you're working on in a team right now, please reach out to me and I would be more than happy to connect with you on that. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free just to shoot something in the chat bar. If there are some that we would have missed during the presentation itself, what we'll do is we'll respond and we'll answer those afterwards. Because on my end right now, I don't see anything coming through in the chat. Camille, do you see if there's any outstanding questions that people may have had?
I do, yes. I'm just seeing some come through in the questions box here. And one that kind of stands out to me, any tips for building / rebuilding trust? Thanks for that question. Shawn, is there anything you can speak to there?
Oh yeah, that's a great question, and I think this whole concept of psychological safeties is critical for that. I think when trust has been broken, I think the first thing to recognize is you've got a bit of a journey ahead of you, that it's actually going to take some time. And based on how the trust was broken, was it the organization, was it the team member, was it the team leader, or was it a team member? There then needs to be a commitment to really doing what you say and living according to the norms that have been established. And recognizing that you're going to have 10 positive behaviors before people even begin to think that maybe you have actually changed. The other thing that I would suggest is for the group that has broken the trust is solicit feedback and change behaviors based on what you're hearing. So you need to ask people, I've heard you, I've made some changes, how is it going? Is it better? You need to ask how it's going.
Thanks, Shawn. I'm seeing a lot of great questions here. There is another one that popped out to me. Oh, and I just lost it. There's lots of good questions, but oh, here it is. Thank you, Lydia. So how do you maximize engagement for a hybrid team? I know you touched a little bit on that at the end of your presentation, but maybe a little bit more information on that.
Sure, I would look up at this concept of shared leadership. And it's really, in essence, it is involving people in identifying the problems, the generating solutions, and making the plan then to implement those solutions. So people aren't just assigned specific tasks that have been determined by other people. They're actually becoming key members in recognizing what's happening in our competitive space and what could we do about it. So you dig further into shared leadership, you get all sorts of great information about how to drive engagement in hybrid teams.
Thanks, Shawn. We do have another question here, if you have another minute, from Catherine. Conflict resolution is always the toughest to deal with. Any best tips there?
Yeah, great question, Catherine. So first, it's uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable for everyone. And there's nothing worse. All the team members know what's going on. They're not comfortable and they're waiting. Why is the leader not dealing with this? That's why it's the biggest problem for team leaders. So you know what? It's tough. That's the nature of the beast, especially if you let it take on too long. So for leaders, guess what? It can be a tough job. Best tip: first, jump into it. Second, reframe the conflict. Most people think of conflict as a fight, but it usually starts with a difference of opinion, and it's how people deal with those differences of opinion that influences, does the conflict turn out well or poorly? So deal with it quickly. Reframe it as, we're looking at this, we just have different perspectives. We need to understand each other's perspectives a little bit more. That would be the great start. a little bit more of a concrete method, using something like the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument is a fantastic way to highlight that we can have instinctual ways to deal with conflict, but we need to be more planful. And the TKI has a great model to show how can we be more planful and adjust our behaviors based on the specific things that we feel we are in conflict about. Oh, I just see one that popped up. Are trust and psychological safety different concepts? They sure are. Psychological safety, I'd say, is a broader one, but trust and psychological safety are close dance partners. Um, Without trust, people won't have psychological safety, is how I would describe it in a broad sense. One last question that I saw, we have leaders who are terrified of giving feedback because they're afraid that people leave and we already have retention issues. How should that be addressed? Um, Well, honestly, if you provide good constructive feedback, employees value it. It's a key thing for them to develop it. If you can do it well, it actually keeps people staying to the organization rather than leaving. Um, that idea of can I learn and develop is a core motivator for most people working in organizations. So I'd say if you're terrified of giving feedback because people are going to leave, they're going to leave if you don't. Um, so I think that's an important way to reframe it. But it needs to be constructive feedback. It can't be this, well, you really let the side down here. It needs to be, how can we talk about what went on and how we could be a little bit more effective or how you could have done it differently. That's actually quite motivating for the vast majority of people. I know we're over time now, and there's a few more questions that have popped through. What I'll do is when we send out the slide deck, I'll include a document where I'll show some answers to those additional questions that we couldn't address here today. But I'd like to thank everyone for turning out, chatting about something that I know I find quite fascinating and I'm quite passionate about, helping people work together well. So take care, enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to speaking with you the next time.